A very quick introduction for this particular WebEx today. We've got myself, I'm Andrew Luthwaite, and also my colleague Nick Stevenson-Steels on the call. So I'll start by going through some of the common challenges around EA. I'll also be looking at some of the key features within ABACUS. Nick will then take you through an ABACUS demonstration. So a live demonstration showing you some of those key features. And then we'll also come on to a bit of a sneak preview, I guess, to a version of ABACUS that will be released in the next few weeks. So we'll touch on some of the key features within that particular release. And of course, at the end, we'll follow up with any questions that anyone has. Once again, please feel free to use that chat functionality for any purposes to speak to each other or to, of course, ask questions. So the first thing to really go through are some of the common EA challenges. And really from a common EA challenge perspective, there are various analyst reports out there. Some of them you've probably read already around things like Gartner's top strategic technology trends for 2022. And there are various things that are really shaping the way people want to both develop and deploy EA as a practice, and also how they might want to use the tools in play as well. Now, realistically, many IT leaders these days are really trying to stay one step ahead of the curve. There's a lot of change going on, whether that's economic changes throughout the world, whether that's technology changes or shifts internally, and even some of the more common themes these days around people working from home. All of these changes are feeding into arguably a much more complex landscape. Traditional ways of working within enterprise architecture, of course, still hold true, but there are some smarter ways that people are trying to make decisions these days. So you will have heard all the terms around AI and machine learning. These are just a couple of aspects that are trying to provide people with quicker decision-making, smarter decision-making, and ultimately just trying to gain a bit more intelligence from the architectures that people are building. Especially with the working from home situation, cloud technology has obviously skyrocketed as well. In turn, that does provide arguably either risks or opportunities to develop further, especially around things like cybersecurity. So for those of you who've listened to these WebExes before and heard some of our customers speak about cybersecurity, it's of course an increasing trend. And it's certainly one of the things that I'll come back to towards the end of the presentation today, just to touch on in a bit more detail about some of the other upcoming events that we have that cover some of these specific topics in more detail, really. So in 2022, certainly the architect's role is becoming much more crucial to documenting the architecture, to document what systems currently in play, what processes are actually feeding some of those systems internally, and what kind of internal or external resources are available. Now, we've called this the common EA challenges. Some of you on the call might not be enterprise architects. You might be business architects, technical architects. Really, an architect's role, regardless of the domain, is to help shape and drive some of these strategic decisions. And of course, the common EA challenges that you're seeing on the screen here are going to be common across many, if not all, industries, especially when it comes to things like managing obsolescence, the increasing applications across the states of people working from home, the increase, therefore, of the cost of that particular application portfolio, all go hand in hand with these challenges, or arguably, like I said, opportunities that arise from these types of situations. Now, of course, these are challenges that we face daily. So as an organization, Avolution, who supply the product ABACUS, I know there's a mixture of people on the call today, those who have seen ABACUS before and are using it, and those maybe who are new to the tool. But Avolution as the company has been going now for about 20 years trying to address these common EA challenges across industries and across different regions globally. We typically support all of our customers then across our offices worldwide. And of course, that helps us develop a very good support network, both through our internal team and through our partners. And also, hopefully, you'll be seeing our name appear on things like the Gartner MQ and the Forrester Wave as the leader in this space for EA tools. The other key thing from a perspective of EA is around the actual tool itself. So again, some of you have seen ABACUS and some of you haven't. But in particular for today, when we start looking at some of the new features, certainly when we start going through some of the areas that Nick will cover around the tool itself, it's worth getting a very quick grasp on some of the terminology that we'll be using. So ABACUS itself is split into two different products, and they both go hand in hand with each other. We have what we call ABACUS Studio and ABACUS Enterprise. So ABACUS Studio is almost like the back-end configuring part of the tool. It's where we effectively do all the heavy lifting, any of the integrations to other tools that we want to set up. It's where we have some cutting-edge analytics running behind the scenes, whether that's across both AI and machine learning. And it's also, of course, where we manage the administration within the tool itself. Enterprise is then really where we start branching off for the wider audience. So enterprise really is that aspect of breaking down not just an enterprise architect's role, but also anyone in the organization who needs visibility across the content that you produce. It is one of the fundamental aspects of using a tool like ABACUS. We want to make sure that the content within that tool is then being communicated throughout the organization, both from a read-only perspective through dashboards, maybe allowing users to contribute to that data or provide feedback on that data. We really are trying to democratize EA across the organization and allowing people to be feeling involved with any of those data points that they want to be involved with. So again, that's really the split of the tool, ABACUS Studio and ABACUS Enterprise. And Nick, of course, will likely be focusing just a bit more on the enterprise side later on, highlighting some of the key features in there. And when I come to talk about the new features, I'll quickly explain how we've split those across both of these products as well. Now, from a tool perspective, and of course, the question is why ABACUS? But for many organizations that are just starting out, EA could be something that's well established as a team, as a practice. It could be also something that users are just venturing into. So we've worked across many different customer bases from 1 or 2 users, up to about 500 users throughout the teams, both from that scale of less mature organizations to the more mature ones. One of the reasons why ABACUS becomes beneficial in this space, if you look through some of the analyst reports, you'll see essentially the highlighting aspects of the innovation side of ABACUS. So EA tools in the past, I guess, have had a reputation for being relatively static, have had potentially a reputation of collecting things without sharing things. And so certainly from an innovation perspective, we are really trying to push the boat here in terms of how users can actually work within ABACUS and actually collaborate on this data as well. We also offer, of course, expert modeling within ABACUS. This really translates to the ability to build your own frameworks, to build your own meta models, to use existing frameworks and notations. And again, this can expand beyond just EA. It doesn't just have to be TOGAF and Archimate. It can leverage other aspects around NIST and cybersecurity, specific reference models for specific industries. We really want to be able to allow users to model in the way that they want without making things so complex or confusing for those new starters. So we have different ways that we can do this in ABACUS, but really we're trying to build a standard within the tool to allow a consistent modeling across any of those domains. Once we build that standard modeling notation, of course, that lends itself to more of a powerful collaboration environment. When users are aware of the data that's going into the tool, when users can actually see that live data, they're going to be much more willing to contribute to that data as well. And this can be both from an aspect of drawing things in a whiteboarding environment or simply updating a few attributes that they feel need correcting. I guess these days it goes without saying that, of course, it's cloud-based too. So of course, you don't need to be managing individual usernames and passwords. This is all single sign-on authentication for global teams who are both working within offices or remotely across many different organizations. So this is just a fundamental part, of course, of why ABACUS would be the tool for preference here. The other key things in here is connected data. It's very often, and certainly I found over the past 8 years now, I think it is, I've been at Avolution, many organizations will already have this data. They might already have processes they've modeled, lists of applications, technologies that they have maybe required or associated internally. And this is usually spread across the organization. It could be other tools that they're using. It could be other systems. It could be in people's heads. And ideally, what we want to start doing is connecting all of these data points together. And this is a fundamental part of why ABACUS is useful, is it's trying to remove, or at least join up at the beginning, some of these siloed pieces of information. So whether that's existing tools, like you can see here through things like ServiceNow or SharePoint, or just using the API in ABACUS to connect to other systems. So as much as it's a tool, we really are trying to treat this as a bit more of a platform where users can collaborate, users can connect to different data sources, and they can build their view of what the organization looks like. By virtue of collaborating, that essentially means that anyone in the organization can have access to this data in a read-only way. There's no limitations on that, of course. It's your data. Anyone can see that within the organization. That does, of course, meaning introductions of more controls within the system. So we do want to make sure that users have an easy way of maintaining users and permissions throughout the model. And I'll come back to this as I touch on some of the new features that we have coming up in the next release to make this even more streamlined. And I'll also be touching on future roadmaps of what we're working on, just to give you a bit more of a sneak peek there as well. And then algorithms and automations, again, is really the direction we're headed. You know, modeling has always been a standard part of EA tools or enterprise architecture in general. We have these, what we call diagram-driven situations, but we really do want to be moving towards a data-driven situation, where if we are trying to calculate costs or risk or resiliency, these are all metrics that we can leverage from other metrics. So the cost of a system might aggregate up and down the model. The resiliency of a piece of infrastructure might affect the processes that run on the systems on that infrastructure. And these algorithms, based on AI and machine learning, become a pivotal part of why ABACUS becomes the tool of choice. Keep in mind as well, especially from an algorithmic perspective, these are designs that you would be building within the tool yourselves. We have some best practices, and we have some recommendations and out-of-the-box algorithms that become very useful. But you have full control over building your own algorithms in ABACUS, in, I guess, an overhyped and overused term of no code in this particular slide. But it really is that easy to just drag and drop and create these algorithms. It shouldn't be a word that scares people off, and we don't have to write any code to build these. We're just trying to use some logic to find hidden data within existing data. And naturally, of course, it's a graph-powered engine. So there's no relational database behind the scenes, which means we can actually build graph databases within ABACUS using our own technology. And that demonstrably allows people to start drilling down through those models. So graph-powered databasing, of course, is a key aspect of ABACUS. It's one of the things that I guess for those of you who've used ABACUS becomes very relevant through dashboards. When you start communicating maybe more complex data in higher level terms and provide these dynamic reporting abilities for users, it becomes much easier to make decisions off the back of that. So impact analysis becomes a click of a button to drill down to see what hands off a specific system. Or we might drill down into projects to see how they're affecting parts of the organization. There are many different use cases for this. And arguably, we may even have an entire WebEx dedicated just to graph databases and graph-powered reporting as well. So keep an eye out for some of those coming up later in the year. So hopefully that gives you a good overview of why ABACUS is going to be useful, not just for EAs, but also for any architects within the organization. What I want to do is pass over to Nick to take you through some of the live demonstrations that we have of ABACUS. And then I'll come back and show you some of the new features that we're working on. And also, like I mentioned, a sneak peek to our future roadmap as well. Nick, over to you, and hopefully this is a smooth transition to you sharing your screen. Perfect.
And hopefully you're seeing ABACUS Enterprise, which is the whole point of this part. So as Andrew was mentioning a little before, we have got the two sides of ABACUS, ABACUS Studio and ABACUS Enterprise. And I am going to be predominantly showing, I say predominantly, 100% showing ABACUS Enterprise today. But I will talk a little bit around how that links into the Studio, the heavy lifting route that you saw in the picture a little earlier. And essentially all of that data that you'll be importing to ABACUS Studio, whether that's through the likes of ServiceNow, Excel spreadsheets, or Visio imports, whatever that data might be, it all links into the same repository, which is going to be displayed here in Enterprise. And what we typically see with these dashboards are different stories that you might want to tell for a stakeholder or a group of stakeholders, could be your peers, and you can start tailoring down your data so they can see precisely what they need to see. For example, here I've just got a welcome page. I don't need to go into the details of my applications, the details of my servers, or the details of my capabilities. It's just a welcome page, an overview, and I could, if I want to, build out different links to take me to different parts of my repository. But what we're going to do is just have a look at some of the different types of dashboards that you can create. And one thing that Andrew's already mentioned is collaboration. What we have here is its catalog. It looks like an Excel spreadsheet, but it's anything but that. Because what we're wanting our users to do when we come into ABACUS is to actually be able to edit that data. As I mentioned, you can see here, I've got lots and lots and lots of columns and rows. Each row is indicating to me a different property, a different attribute again to my applications. And as you can see here, I've got over 1,100 applications in my catalog. That's a lot of data. And if you put that in front of anyone in your business, they're going to go, what is this? Too much. Give me what I need. And you can, very simply. And it's just a matter of taking or adding away whichever columns that you deem necessary. So you can create different cuts of the data depending on your audience. And once that's done, I'm not going to do too much on that today, but you have the ability to go in and edit any of this data in here. So let's say we've got this application here. I can find my suppliers, and let's say that organization XYZ supplies this. And what you'll see is that there we go, it's put it to the top and it's updated that. So that's making a connection. I might want to add a new description if I can spell. And what you can see as well, you can even see down to the second when it was last updated and who by. So me at 3:04 p.m. GMT, I've updated that connection to XYZ. I update this description now, and it's all updating live into my repository. And you can do whatever you need to with that in terms of application updates, capabilities, process, whatever it might be. It's down to your imagination on how you do that. Obviously, once we've got this data in here, and even if you do cut that down to a specific part for a set of users, even in this case, I might just want to show the actors that own it, but we'd still have over 1,000 results for my applications. So if I take us to my application portfolio view, this is where we can start to consider putting different charts on here. And at the moment, we're still bombarded with that massive data. There's no escaping that massive data, but what we can do is start using the filtering mechanism to really hone in on what we actually care about. Because you can see here, we've got, if I zoom in ever so slightly to make this a bit larger, we've got a bubble chart here showing our technical fit scores, of our applications and our business fit scores, ranging from -3 to +3 for each axis, which actually correlates nicely with the time recommendations that we have in here. So time being tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate, or we sometimes have the 3 R's as well. So refresh, retain, restructure, and I can't remember the 4th one, so we'll slide back that one for the time being. But all of those properties, they are automated. Andrew has mentioned already algorithms. And what we actually do is we calculate the business fit and technical fit based on some out-of-the-box algorithms that we provide that are looking at weighted valuings based on connected processes for business fit against the number of users and how much they cost. And the technical fit is against, as it suggests, any connected technology. We're looking at if it's still in date or not, how close is it to becoming retired. And that will run automatically and set those scorings. Once we've got these, again, fine, we've got it all. But what I can start to do is say, well, I actually only care about my highly critical applications. And you can see here we've got the level 5, there's 199 of them. I can click on this column and it filters down all of my content. It filters down my charts, and you'll see I've got 199 results left on my catalog. I want to have a look at the ones that are earmarked or recommended to be retired or eliminated. I'm now showing 54 of them. And what this starts telling me now is I've got 37 that are end of life. So we know that we're going to be getting rid of these applications, or they might already be non-existent in our portfolio. But I've actually got 17 that are still in production. That to me is triggering some flags. And I can start drilling into these, looking at items that are, well, actually we've got this one here in the top right corner that's worth $428,000. That's a good business fit and a good technical fit. And it's hitting these 3 criteria. And what I can do is actually drill into that. And what you might have seen on the previous section is you can put an email address on there to enable you just to get directly in touch with one of your colleagues. A lot of you will work in large organizations. You're not bound to know everyone. So what this allows you to do, and I'll just hop back over onto the initial dashboard that we looked at, is you're able to click on the user and open it within Teams or whatever your messaging service is internally. And that will open in Microsoft Teams, and you can start messaging them, even if you've not met them before. So it just enables that collaborative environment. Moving on to a couple of the other items you've got on here. So that's the filtering mechanism of ABACUS working with all these different portlets. That's what we call each of these boxes. I'm just going to go into our business side of things, because we've got a few other items on here. So you can see we've got some diagrams on here. I've actually got this item on the right, which is called a graph view portlet. And what that does is it enables us to really drive into the impacts of particular components. So if I just maximize this, so it's a bit easier for everyone to see, I might look at my management and support section, and it will show me all of the items that sit underneath this grouping. I might want to actually have a look at, well, what is this capability impacting? And we'll see that it's directly connected to a couple of projects and a particular data entity, but it also has several child components in the form of processes. If we're going to edit any processes, I might be looking at this one and say, well, what is it connected to as well? And all of a sudden, I'm starting to say, well, actually, before I edit this capability or process, I need to take into account what and who it's going to be impacting. We're looking at lots of departments here and lots of applications. And we can start expanding out further, just see where those applications link to servers and potentially where else these departments impact as well. So we can start building this web. This is showing every single connection. we might only want to see it based on a specific point of view. So let's say, for example, I want to drill into my operating processes. So this tree map here, another dynamic visualization. You can see that it's sized based on this. This is a diagram that it's depicting, but sized based on the aggregated total cost of ownership. So $1.5 billion here. So we're spending a lot on processes in the operating section, but $3.5 billion in the management and support. So fortunately, we're in a large organization with a lot of money to spend. We can drill down into this, and what you'll see is the filtering will take effect again. It filters down, so I'm only looking at that part of my area in my graph view, but also you'll have noticed the diagram has filtered down once more as well. So again, I'm only viewing the areas that I'm interested in. It helps your audience stay focused when they're looking at the information, rather than getting distracted by data that might not be relevant. We drill down a little more, and you can see it all links back again. So it's looking at the one capability under there now, and I can actually zoom in on here, and I'm able to edit data within the diagrams. All of this data is live, is saving back into the central repository instantly. And what I can see on here is I can say, well, I know this one's been set to refresh migrate. I might just decide if this is a manual property, we might want to get rid of this particular process for whatever reason. And what you'll see is it changes color. This changes color as well. So it's all intrinsically linked together. You change data on a diagram or a catalog, it changes it in the repository. You're working from one source of truth. And I'll just come out of this for now and just remove those filters. And there we go. We can see my diagram reverts back and everything is there for me to see as we previously saw. And a couple more things I want to show on here is we often look at applications and other content. I'm quite focused on applications here, but we are very focused around timelines, whether that's a future state view or we're looking at timelines in terms of when something's going to be done. And what we can look at is with all our applications, again, all over 1,100 of them, we can start to drill down into our management support processes. It will remove everything on here because these are geared to set up and look at my applications. But I've got my capabilities that drill down into those processes. But I might want to see, well, what do they link to underneath? What applications drive these processes? And we can see here, there's quite a lot. But we also can see as well that we've actually got some items here that went out of date back in 2017. So we can start seeing straight away, well, what do these applications do? Why is application 539? And if I want to find that one on here, let's just have a look for 539. Why is that still in use? Like, is it going to be taken over by anything? And if that isn't shown on here, we can make sure that we put that information on here. So we've got a target application to be taken over by. I'm just seeing if it's already been shown. And it probably is. It's just a big old catalog. There we go. Application target. That's what I want to show. What is this one being replaced by? I'll put that right to the bottom. And what I can see is actually nothing is replacing this yet. So I've got to make a decision. Do I get in touch with whoever owns it to find out if it's going to be replaced or not? Or do I contact our support help desk? So it flags my awareness. Again, I'll just remove all this and we're back to our original view. I was conscious of the time. That was a very quick whistle-stop tour of ABACUS and a few of the features. Andrew, I don't know if there's anything more that you'd like me to elaborate on. If not, I can pass back to you.
That's perfect, Nick. Thank you. I will start sharing my screen again. Perfect. Thanks, Nick. So yes, that is hopefully a good overview of obviously ABACUS in action. There's a couple of slides we'll go through just to kind of reiterate and reinforce some of those points. Hopefully what you'll notice through something like ABACUS Enterprise, though, are those kind of visual effects, the filtering effects that Nick were applying there. The key aspect, again, around ABACUS Enterprise is really trying to communicate the content that you're producing in something like a digestible dashboard that's much more dynamic. So traditionally, I guess these were maybe ad hoc reports that were built. And I say traditionally, even today, obviously customers and companies are building reports through things like PowerPoint slides and decks. And what we've tried to do is allow people to have a much more interactive environment for that work, so that they can almost build their own view from a baseline. So if they wanted to highlight, as Nick did there, specific applications that weren't targeted to be replaced by anything, that could be an issue that we want to dive into. And so that's really the benefits of using these dashboards, is in a dynamic way, we can actually filter these down. And if we get to a stage where we've filtered them to a specific point, so again, let's take Nick's example of drilling down through the specific processes and capabilities, seeing what applications supported those processes, and then quickly realizing that application 539 didn't have a replacement, we can then send those pre-filtered dashboards to anyone in the organization. So we might want to start a quick Teams chat with those people. We might want to copy them into a specific dashboard that we've built. We might want to give them direct access to the dashboard so they can go through and make those changes themselves, or simply just provide feedback or change requests for the architects to go in and make those changes. But again, it's all about making sure that, yes, it's an EA tool, but it doesn't need to come across like maybe traditional EA tools. Especially around enterprise as well. We typically embed this elsewhere. You might want to put this into Teams or Confluence, anywhere where people are already working. It makes it a much easier way and a slightly more intuitive way to actually collaborate and engage with those users around their data. The other key thing was the actual diagrams themselves. So we have all of this data. Not everyone wants to see that in a list-based view. So providing the ability to actually build these diagrams that represent real-world data, being able to navigate through those views, being able to automatically lay those views out, so you spend less time manually dragging and dropping content around and more time actually using that data. These are just some of the key things within ABACUS Enterprise, in this case specifically, that helps with those specific situations. So spend less time manually drawing, spend more time automating these views and getting people involved. But finally there as well was the ability to actually use ABACUS Enterprise as almost like a whiteboarding environment. So this is a critical part of ABACUS Enterprise. Not only will users have access to the data, not only will they be able to change the attributes, but they can actually start drawing things directly in ABACUS Enterprise as well. So imagine this embedded in Teams. Users are just drawing up their kind of day-to-day process views perhaps, and submitting those for review to be pushed into production perhaps. These are just some of the quick ways that we can get people to contribute information without feeling like they have to go through another tool first, export, import, tidy up and map things. They can do this directly within ABACUS. So again, it's all about trying to provide different people within the organization different levels of access to the content that might or might not already exist. So now on to maybe just a few new features that are coming up in the next few weeks with a new release. We only want to highlight these briefly because of course you'll all hopefully be getting hands-on with a new release very soon. But we just want to quickly pinpoint where our focuses have been currently. And then we'll also very quickly at the end give you a bit of an idea of where we're headed as well. So one of the first things that's coming into the new release is a change to how we're actually working with permissions in ABACUS. So we're streamlining the ability to manage permissions. This means that we'll have another UI window within the tool itself, so that we can very quickly turn on and off permissions for different groups of users. And keep in mind the permissions in ABACUS works across the entire model. So whether it's from a type level to a diagram or a view level, all the way down to an attribute or property level. So I can easily control the fact that maybe only certain people can see my list of applications, or maybe only people can see them but not see the cost, or things like IP addresses or more sensitive information. So I'm making that, as you can see, hopefully much more streamlined. Of course, for those of you who haven't seen ABACUS before, this might not necessarily look new to you, but certainly for the existing users, and we're just making that a slightly more efficient process. We are constantly updating the libraries that we have within the tool as well. I quickly mentioned specific frameworks earlier on, things like TOGAF, Archimate, BPMN, standard notations, but we do of course have full UI and library shapes for Azure and AWS as well. So these are again constantly being updated, and there'll be a new refresh for the next release, which means these are going to be more available for those technical or solution architects to actually build these types of deployment views, and then potentially link these up to other areas of the architecture as well. Again, as always, you have full flexibility of designing your own notation within the tool. And of course, you can import existing notations from tools like Visio as well. We've made some slight improvements to the digital whiteboarding environment. So that's the ABACUS Enterprise modeler users. So of course, you can drag and drop and build your own views in here. You can change hierarchy levels and attributes. And we're introducing some new functions around undo, redo. And of course, as a modeling environment, we're going to be consistently improving this part of the tool to make it even easier for people to draw things and then maybe specialize those drawings within ABACUS later on. So again, a very quick way to actually add content to the tool where it's not just list-based, but people feel like they can draw anything in here. And then of course, they might go through some kind of approval process, but it's giving people that power to actually build their own views in a much more seamless way as well. Now, one of the biggest changes we are making to ABACUS is around the performance within the tool. So currently our example project in ABACUS, this is just an example project that comes out of the box. It's a relatively small file footprint. It's probably about 6 megabytes or so. And it probably has over maybe 2 million different types of objects, relationships, and attributes, including potentially the views as well. So ABACUS does scale very well, but of course, one of the key things is from a collaboration aspect, we want to significantly improve the speed and loading times of committing changes in ABACUS. So we've made significant changes here to make sure that we can run things and load things on demand so that we don't just open everything on opening of the file. We're also working, of course, for the next release on only saving and committing specific object changes rather than the entire file. So as much as it's a relatively small footprint, we are streamlining that part as well. And we will be working on some validation improvements within ABACUS. Validation improvements is just our rules engine. It helps users create content in the right way, rules that any user can define within the tool, but it helps maintain a consistency across the model. So we're validating potentially only things that have changed rather than the entire file itself. And there are various other validation improvements that you'll be coming across as well. So much more of an on-demand memory usage this time around, rather than loading everything. That should significantly help with those customers who have multiple architectures. So again, we have the ability of having different scenarios that we can model within the tool. And there could be as many as 10, 20, 100 different scenarios that you're modeling. So we've significantly improved how it deals with the number of architectures in the project there as well. You quickly saw Nick going through some of the enterprise current version of ABACUS release, which was around the dashboards and the modeling. Again, there are some smaller improvements on there as well, specifically around the search suggestions in there, and specifically around the filtering and the undo redo capabilities for modeling. Generally, I think I mentioned at the beginning, the direction we're headed as a company is to focus much more on the data-driven part of ABACUS, but we're also making some conscious efforts internally to work on specific parts of the product that aren't necessarily, let's say, EA related. What that really translates to is some of the future improvements. So generally across the products, Studio and Enterprise, we're significantly improving the accessibility of the product, both for use of accessibility tools in line with specific softwares, but really just to make sure that everyone has access to the content that they need and they aren't feeling like they're running into any issues, struggling to actually access the data. So there'll be significant accessibility improvements in the current release and also in future releases as well. As always with these releases, we encourage customer feedback. We have customer feedback sessions. So anyone who has any suggestions for the product, of course, there are usual channels like our community and our support team that you can go through to request specific features that we'll, of course, then work on internally. I mentioned in the next release, which is upcoming in the next few weeks, we've changed the permissions window, so it's much more streamlined. We'll be taking that a step further in the future, and in the future being later this year, to overhaul the access rights. So moving to more of a grant permission model and to an optimistic model rather than removing permissions from users. You'll hear a lot more about that as the year goes on, but that should also significantly improve how we can allow certain groups of users accessing certain parts of the tool as well. The Visual Algorithm Composer is a part of the algorithms I mentioned earlier on around things like calculating cost values or resiliency. Again, we'll be likely adding some new, what we call blocks to that no-code algorithm composer. Currently, you can run algorithms across components and attributes and run aggregations and operations against that data. But we will slowly be starting to think of new blocks that can be even more useful, not just for running algorithms against the data, but also potentially to improve and enhance some of the workflow capabilities within the tool. So keep an eye out for those. We'll obviously expand on that much closer once the next release is out as well. And like I mentioned, of course, we have a dedicated internal UX team here. So there'll be some significant changes across both products there as well, improving, of course, on the personalization of software, allowing people to actually make certain changes within the interfaces, and generally streamlining some of the menu options available. So again, we'll be updating our users closer to the time when those get released. But like I said, keep an eye out for those improvements, and hopefully, even with the future improvements in the next release, there's enough in there to keep you busy with ABACUS in the meantime. Now, we do have time left for questions. I know there have been a few questions coming in already, so I'll just open a chat window on my side and go through a couple of those first. And then, of course, as I go through these, if there are any other questions, feel free to throw those into the chat window, and we'll do our best to answer all of those. If we don't have time to answer all of them, we'll reach out to you individually just to answer those as well. But I'll start going through a couple of these that have come through. So there's a first question in here around, are you differentiating EA from ETA? So we're classing, of course, EA as enterprise architecture in this case. I'll assume for this one, ETA is enterprise technology architecture. It could well be transformation, but I'll assume technology for now. And yes, of course, there's a differentiation between those. EA in general, of course, is taking a more holistic, kind of even approach between technology and strategic content within the tool. ETA, of course, is also an important aspect, especially when it comes to the way that we've managed technology for different users. So customers will likely want to interact with external sources of information. I mentioned things like ServiceNow earlier on, but Technopedia is also, of course, a key one there for managing technologies. And usually from a technology architecture perspective, There are specific principles that they're trying to build, specific patterns or standards around technologies. And just like we might build a capability map for business, we might build a capability map for technology. Customers will do this very often. They'll build technology reference models indicating for specific areas of the organization. Let's take business intelligence as one. There are specific technologies that should or shouldn't be used. And likewise, for different deployment methods or cloud technologies, there are different solutions or patterns that should be used for specific situations. So I guess, yes, we are differentiating that when we actually come to deployment and actually using ABACUS. We've used EA as a bit of an umbrella term here to encompass most things, hopefully, all the way from strategic content through to business, including capability maturity indexes, BPMN, technology maps, applications, infrastructure, security. That's all going to be possible to model within ABACUS. Another question here, which is, I'll answer this one first, just because it's slightly related to the comment I made there. So how does this work with existing CMDB, ITSM, and project management tools? So yes, certainly around those types of areas. I mentioned ServiceNow, Technopedia, SharePoint, the ability to import from other sources. You can take the traditional ETL routes of extracting, transforming, and loading data to things like Excel and Visio as a starting point. But the majority of the time, when we are working with customers, we do try to identify where those sources of information are. If it's within an area like ServiceNow, where we have an out-of-the-box integration, of course, that's perfect. If that's not the case, maybe we're using something like HP UCMDB or project management tools from Microsoft, then we'll usually leverage the REST API in ABACUS to build some kind of integration. Now, the type of integration that we tend to build will also depend on the situation. For example, is it a one-time import? Do we need a constant automated integration? As things get updated in another tool, it automatically gets pushed to ABACUS. Those are, of course, very common types of integrations. But as usual for these types of situations, it also opens the question of where is the master data. So very often customers will want to connect to ServiceNow. In that situation, we might assume ServiceNow is the master, and therefore ABACUS might be mastering 80% of the attributes from ServiceNow. Now, in that type of situation, we might want to make some of that content read-only in ABACUS, because we want to make sure it's updated in ServiceNow and pulled into ABACUS and not vice versa. So there are different levels of how it works with those existing tools. But there is generally another quick rule of thumb there, which is specific tools like CMDBs or ITSM tools. I'm going to generically say are capturing the current state and the as is. Ideally, what we're going to be doing by bringing that into ABACUS is linking that and building future views, different scenarios, different modeling situations, using the data that already exists about the current state to help build a future state. And that's one of the key things there about integrating or at least leveraging some of the data from those tools. There's another question in here, if I could explain the main differences between Studio and Enterprise and how we can actually compare architecture changes. This might lead into the next question around, can we actually share this deck of slides? So to both of those questions, so yes, we'll share the slide deck. And hopefully that does also answer the idea that you'll be able to compare the differences between Studio and Enterprise there as well. If you want to see how we compare architecture changes, how we provide diff reports and sync reports, feel free to reach out to one of the team, and we'll be more than happy to take you through that in much more detail on our one-to-one call. And that way we can actually build demonstrations specific to your requirements. If you have seen other sessions of ours, you might have come across that ability to merge architectures and provide a diff and sync report. If not, like I said, reach out and we'll be more than happy to set that up. Once again, yeah, generally we'll provide the slide deck, and yes, this webinar is recorded. So of course, feel free to watch this back. There is just another question here as well around roadmaps. So what type of roadmaps can we produce? I think maybe Nick touched on a roadmap view in ABACUS. So example, technical or strategic. So yes, I mean, road mapping in general, it is a big term. And for those of you who've seen similar WebExes before, we've provided an entire WebEx just on road mapping and the different styles, the 4 styles of roadmaps that we would subscribe to. But road mapping in general is provided out of the box in ABACUS. And what that could mean is some kind of heat mapping effect. So the tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate statuses. There could be some time-based, not tolerate, invest, migrate, eliminate, but specific lifecycle dates that we use to manage those roadmaps. And again, that could be both across the technical aspects or strategic aspects. So they could be, what kind of specific objectives are we trying to reach, and how does that affect our overall goals or vision as a company, all the way down to what technologies does this application require, what are the end of vendor support dates, and how do we actually manage that internally. 2 completely different styles of roadmaps, but arguably both fall under that road mapping umbrella for how we can build those within the tool. So again, for those types of situations, of course, we'll definitely send out some more information surrounding those types of questions. I know we're running short on time here. I know there's a couple more questions. So what we'll do is we'll reach out to anyone who hasn't had their question answered today. And what I want to do is just do a very quick, I guess, thank you for everyone who's joined today. Like I mentioned, this will be recorded and the slide deck will be available, so we can send this out. But I also just want to quickly plug in here another specific event that we have coming up in the year. This is something that we've had for a few years now, our Enterprise Architecture Summit. This is a virtual event. And one of the key benefits from this specific event that we have is it isn't just my voice you'll be hearing potentially, but it's an event where we have a number of our customers talking both about how they've used and leveraged ABACUS to address different use cases, and also specific EA discussions with our customers, and of course, anyone else who joins. So keep an eye out for this, because there are some very interesting topics around technical debt, cloud migration, and cybersecurity. And it gives you the opportunity to speak to our customers, understand their experience both with EA and ABACUS, and also an opportunity for you all to learn and share, I guess, first-hand experiences around specific topics within this industry as well. So once again, thank you very much, everyone, for your time, and thank you, Nick, for that great presentation of ABACUS Enterprise. If anyone has any further questions at all, just feel free to reach out. But in the meantime, I hope you all have a good rest of the day. And once again, thank you for your time.